Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Propensity to Talk Density, a podcast from Bell Geospace. I'm your host, Tyler Kern. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of the show. Today, we're talking about exploration challenges and opportunities in Malaysia. But before we jump into all of that, let me introduce you to our guest today. His name is Roy Kittrell. He is the regional geologist for Bell Geospace there in the Asia Pacific area. Roy, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Did you say this is called propensity for density?
A propensity to talk
That's
density.
a fantastic. I think I need to change all of my presentations now. We need to have that as the leading title. That's excellent. I don't know who came up with that, but that was great. Yeah.
Big props to whoever came up with the name of the podcast.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah,
I love it as well. So, Roy, give the audience a little bit of background on you. Just your history in the industry, also how you ended up in Malaysia, maybe, and maybe some of the things you enjoy doing there and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I've been in the oil and gas industry for about 15 years now. Wow, hard to believe that. And I've worked on everything from centimeter scale geology, doing core analysis as at Task Frontera, to field scale. So I did a lot of geological modeling and static modeling, different companies. And now, of course, work at Bell, and we work at the basin scale. So I've worked at geology at all scales of the spectrum. And now I've been based in Malaysia for the last, I guess it's been about 5 years now. And it's been really amazing getting to go in and talk to all of the different operators and the different companies here and look at all of the different kinds of problems that we've been able to solve and help them work with. And of course, living in Malaysia has been fantastic as well. It's a country rich in natural heritage. So I've been indulging myself a lot in the nature that's to be found here. It has one of the highest biodiversities of any country in the world. So I've taken on nature photography. And so I do a lot of work outside of my job doing that. That's one of my hobbies.
I love that. That's awesome. Taking advantage of that opportunity for sure. That's really incredible. So before we dive too far into our topic today, we know that Bell Geospace has extensive data all over this region, right? So can you tell us about the 2021 and 2022 bid rounds and give us a little bit of a background there?
Yeah, the 2022 bid round is really interesting to me because, as always, everyone's really excited to see what kind of blocks are on offer, and it kind of tells you a lot about what the country is hoping its operators are going to get into. And so the previous bid round, there was like some very selective blocks on offer, and I think for the previous bid round there wasn't anything in Sarawak, for instance. But for this bid round, it's really interesting. There's a lot on offer. You have blocks all over the Malay Basin over here in Peninsular Malaysia. There's now a lot of blocks on offer for Sarawak, and they're really getting operators to kind of look at some of these other blocks that may have gone unnoticed or unused previously in the past. And then over in Sabah, we have 3 different blocks on offer. So really, there's something for everyone here, and there's lots of different opportunities available. Bell Geospace is in the unique position to be able to offer data on a lot of these areas, not only in the offshore, but in the onshore and in a huge regional capacity.
So when it comes to diving into all of this data that is available, what's a good place for us to start? Where can you kind of begin to consume all of this?
Well, first of all, a lot of the information is going to be available in the data room. So any operator looking at the different blocks on offer is going to have access to some of this data when they actually start going in and seeing which blocks are on offer. But we actually have a new package that we're going to be offering. Of course, obviously, all of the data is accessible to anyone who wants to come and talk to us, and they can see any information they want, and we have everything on offer. But we actually have a new system where we're going to be offering different data packages at a reduced rate, and they are available for renting. So you can rent the data for a full year, and you only pay for the part that is over your block if you win it. So, for instance, if an operator was interested in PM428, they could have a look at that data package. They would get access to maybe 68,000 square kilometers worth of data, which is a huge coverage. But then they would only pay for it if they win the block, and then they would only have to pay for 13,000 square kilometers of it, for instance. So we have a lot of really exciting data packages available for those interested.
Interesting stuff. So tell me a little bit more about basement mapping and what that looks like, and maybe that's the beginning point for a lot of people when it comes to taking a look at some of this data, right?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say is, honestly, anything I can't really describe a lot of this data in just talking about it. You really have to see it for yourself. So I really encourage anyone who's actually interested, really just come and have a look at these images. I challenge any geologist to see these FTG maps without getting excited about it. So FTG, as you understand, is full tensor gravity gradiometry, and it maps out density contrast in the subsurface. So using that, we can generate some really amazing maps of the regional geology at a huge scale. And basement mapping is one of the things that FTG is extremely good at. So seeing some of these regional basement maps is really an impressive use of FTG. And I really encourage anyone interested to come and have a look at these because the images are stunning.
Excellent stuff. So, follow-up question then. So, is that where we find the hydrocarbons?
This, no data exists in isolation, and FTG is not directly pointing people towards hydrocarbon reserves, but it's going to give you a lot of ideas about what the regional geology is doing, what your structure maps are doing. A lot of the FTG, we believe, we have some case studies to show as well, where it correlates to a lot of the known hydrocarbon accumulations. So looking at a lot of different areas, you can use all of the different components of FTG to identify the structures that you're interested in and solve the different problems for each area. You can't give a cure-all silver bullet for, the entire world. Otherwise, we wouldn't even need to have podcasts or any of these other, collaborations. People would just be buying it and they would know where to drill. But solving the unique individual problems is part of what makes my job so interesting out here, and trying to find out how to apply this technology is what makes this so interesting.
So one of the big distinctions to be made is between qualitative and quantitative interpretations of the data, right? Can you break that down for us? Tell us a little bit more about that and how a client can know which approach is right for them between qualitative and quantitative.
So, I think looking at these different approaches, again, it's going to depend on the specific scenario. But the first approach is always going to be qualitative. So you can take the FTG maps and then maybe perhaps overlay your pre-existing structural geological interpretations, maybe some of the pre-existing information you have from seismic data or wells, and you can start to correlate and see where the density contrasts are correlating with what you think is already going on. And then in a quantitative way, we can do inversion. So we work with a partner who do kind of the more like quantitative approach, and they can do constrained and unconstrained inversion. So they can take the data and invert it to produce stuff like structure maps or depth to basement. And they can even do unconstrained and constrained. So we can either do it straight from the data, so it's just pure data analysis, or constrained, so we can take a lot of the pre-existing data, such as like well or seismic information. We can kind of try and plug that information in and then invert it. And then that gives us a really good idea about where we are in terms of how well we understand the basin and how much our data is telling us compared to the other data sets that are available. So, it really depends on each individual scenario. But, I saw some really amazing results inverting our data, both the FTG and the aeromagnetic data, looking at the basement, depth to basement in the Malay Basin. So some really fantastic results there.
That's really interesting stuff. And I wonder, and I suppose this is the case, there must be economies of scale for using people with experience in the region, right? Is that the case, that there's value there?
Oh, absolutely. Oil is found in the minds of geologists, I believe, is a phrase that I've heard often. But absolutely, I would say that no data set exists in isolation when it comes to geology. We're only ever seeing 10 to 15% of the picture at any time. So it's always really important to understand the regional geology, the regional sense of the context of what you're looking at. And that's one of the benefits of FTG, is that it covers such a huge area. And the map you can see on our website, we have extensive coverage over almost all of the oil and gas blocks in the region. And understanding that huge context is really an important part of the FTG interpretation process. And being able to kind of put your, if you see a fault going through your block, it's a good thing that you've been able to see that. But seeing it in that regional context just gives you a whole new level of appreciation. And the other benefit of FTG, of course, is that we have coverage both offshore and onshore, and we can cover that transition zone because we're acquiring it from an airplane. So it makes no functional operational difference to us whether we're offshore or onshore. So we're able to take that the information you're seeing in your block, and we're able to put it in this regional context that previously was very difficult when you only have, this postage stamp sized seismic block over your area. So getting that regional context allows your geologist to make just that much more of an informed decision.
Right, right. So in the end, surely the main objective of using all of this data is to find oil and gas, right? How does your data help kind of provide for that end?
Well, first of all, you can use FTG and you can filter in the wavelengths to see all the different levels of the geology in your area. So it's not just giving you one image or one picture. It's actually giving you like a layered approach to the area that you're interested in. And secondly, it's allowing you to start making decisions about what your basin's looking like, and then so you can see the extents of like the full basin that you have, but you can also see the structures inside of that basin. So you can start to really pinpoint down. So here's your basin, here are the structures inside of it, and then a good geologist will be able to look at that and say, okay, this is from the structural history that we know of this area and where the hydrocarbon is accumulating. You can start to work out like a history of where the hydrocarbon bearing sediments are available, and then start to make decisions about maybe where you want to get your seismic survey done. So now you don't need this huge regional 3D survey. You can actually just pinpoint down and maybe just get the package over the areas that you're interested in to answer those specific questions. The other interesting thing about FTG is that it gives you density information. So one of the things that's difficult to get from seismic data is actually inverting it for density. Is quite a complicated and difficult process. But with FTG, you can have your seismic and density information directly on top of each other. And one area that comes in really handy is like the Laconia province. So in the Laconia province, you're really looking at these carbonate structures at around 1 kilometer depth, which is high relief, relatively shallow geological structures. That's an ideal case scenario for FTG. And what's really fascinating is you can take this seismic information, you can map out your carbonates, and then right on top of that, you can look at the FTG and get density information. So immediately you're getting like this really interesting cross breeding of data sets, and that allows operators to see which carbonates they're really interested in for this area, for instance. And one thing that they're going to be trying to look at is like which carbonates are more porous and which carbonates are not porous. And the FTG gives you that insight. In fact, there's a whole case study on Laconia that anyone interested should absolutely get in touch with us, and I can go over it with you. But even more interesting than that is those carbonates. Although they are hydrocarbon bearing, there's actually a lot of geology that's going on underneath them that the seismic has not been able to detect because the energy is absorbed largely by these carbonates. But FTG is unhindered by these kind of restrictions, so we're able to image a lot of the basement structures that's happening in the area. And we have a lot of really interesting imagery that's coming out of this area that really is invisible in the seismic. So a lot of these regional structural patterns are very visible in the FTG. And so we have a ton of information in this area that's going to really help people looking at the bid round blocks, certainly in the Sarawak area, and definitely down in the south where we have SK328. Some really interesting stuff going on.
I've also read a little bit about the importance of boundary mapping as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how key it is?
Boundary mapping. I would say maybe I'm probably more used to calling it a lineament analysis. So really possibly taking the data and looking at the different density contrasts. FTG is essentially just mapping out density contrasts in the subsurface. So that really gives you a lot of information about where those geological boundaries are and different geological bodies that are in the subsurface. Mapping out where you have those density boundaries is where you're going to be getting a lot of your important information, and maybe even finding out where there aren't boundaries. That's also going to be important for the geological interpretations.
Absolutely. So what are some of the other uses of this data? Is it used in other ways as well?
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly looking at a lot of different analysis, ways of applying it. Some of the uses we've had in the U.S. actually, we have case studies on this for anyone interested. Is looking at shallow hazard analysis. So we were actually able to drastically improve the success rate of wells in the States, looking at shallow hazards. So, for instance, where they would drill down and there's maybe, kind of like a cave system, there would be like drill losses and it would be very expensive for the operator to drill there. But using FTG maps, we're able to locate where these shallow hazards are more likely to be located, and we were able to increase the success rate quantitatively for a lot of these drill uses. So, a really interesting pattern, a really interesting use case for FTG. Looking at geothermal energy, is a new application for FTG that we're now investigating. Looking at where you have these kind of high, heat flow areas. The geology is going to be able to, tell you a lot about that, and using FTG to locate that is really useful and use for FTG.
Good stuff. So, Roy, before we wrap up this episode of the podcast today, I want to give you the opportunity to give us any final thoughts, anything that you want to leave our audience with here today on this topic and on this episode. So, let me turn the floor over to you just for any final thoughts or anything we haven't touched on yet that you think is important to discuss.
Yeah, I think this bid round is really important for a lot of the operators in Malaysia who are kind of maybe waiting for that opportunity to get into a block that they're really interested in. And there's, as I said before, there's something for everyone in this bid round. There's a lot of interesting ideas and data sets out there that are available, and we would love to talk to anyone who is interested in using FTG and seeing how we can apply our data to your exploration use cases.
Excellent stuff. Roy Kittrell, he's regional geologist at Bell Geospace. Roy, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast and sharing a little bit more about the challenges and opportunities presented by Malaysia.
Okay, thank you so much for having me, and really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Absolutely. We appreciate you joining us today as well. And listeners, we appreciate you listening along and joining us here for this episode of the podcast. For more, if you want to reach out, if you want to ask questions, if you want to get in touch with people like Roy, head to bellgeo.com. There you can get more information, find out how you can reach out and get in touch with more people to get your questions answered and that sort of thing. So you want to go ahead and go to bellgeo.com. Thank you again for joining us for this episode of the show. Stay tuned for more upcoming episodes from the podcast. But for this one, for my guest today, Roy Kittrell, I've been your host, Tyler Kern. Thanks for joining us.